I'm here at Melbourne's iconic Readings bookstore with Zoë Morrison, the author of Music and Freedom. Zoe, welcome to the Better Reading channel.
Oh, thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the Better Readings community for tuning in today. I really appreciate it.
Now, Zoe, you've been an accomplished pianist, a Rhodes Scholar, a fellow at Oxford, and now the author of this beautiful and heartbreaking novel, Music and Freedom. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Melissa, Music and Freedom is about an older woman called Alice Haywood who's decided it's time to die. And she spends what she thinks are going to be her final days doing 4 things: burning her husband's papers and books, making some mysterious prank calls, filing sheet music, and also playing a single note over and over on her piano. And then one day, she hears that note come back on another piano, and then she hears music. Now, it sounds like it's coming from the house next door to her, but she knows that that house is vacant. And then that music, whoever or whatever is making that music, starts making mistakes. And Alice can't help herself correcting them. And what begins is a musical conversation that ultimately demands Alice makes a decision about what really matters to her and what love is. It's a relationship that ends up saving Alice's life.
Now, Zoe, this is an amazing book because in part it draws in rural Australia and some of the, most kind of, I guess, incredibly, effete, if you like, parts of England. Like you're going to Oxford with these incredibly academic scholars and, you're entering these grand music halls. I guess it would be really lovely to talk a little bit about where you drew that from. Where in Australia are you from originally?
I was born in a small town called Oberon, which is near the Blue Mountains, and we moved to Adelaide when I was 7. But one of my grandmothers comes from Riverina, Australia, so she lived among oranges and citrus blocks, and that was a place that we always returned to when I was a child. So even when I moved interstate or even when I moved in overseas, that place became the constant. And then Oxford, where the other part of the book is set, is somewhere where I lived and studied for 3 years, and then I worked there as an academic for 5 years. But I also did my PhD based in Oxford, actually in a council housing estate on the outskirts of Oxford. So these places, they have great meaning to me, and it was a deep pleasure to be back in those places every time I was working on the book.
Now, this is such a moving and heartfelt book.
Thank you.
But it's got a real musicality to it, and I'm wondering what music were you listening to? Because I have to say, without giving too much away, while you talk about some of the most incredible classical music of modern times, you also talk about 80s pop music. So I'm wondering, is this a little bit of a confession about your love of 80s pop as well?
Yeah. Well, Melissa, I started the violin when I was 3, and I started the piano when I was 5, and I've played music all through my life. But when I went to Oxford, my relationship with music started to change, actually. I was doing some concerts in the Holywell Music Room, which is the oldest concert hall in continuous use in Europe, but I was also doing these trips all the time to this council housing estate on the outskirts of the town, and this really I started to question what I was doing in relation to classical music, playing the same old pieces people had played for centuries. How did this all relate to what I was seeing and hearing about issues of social justice? So when I was writing the book, I had all this knowledge of classical music in my head, so much so that, as I just said, it's ingrained within me, I suppose, that sort of music. But at the same time, I also love other genres, and in the book, that 80s pop signals an awakening of the character, a great release. Cyndi Lauper, for example, her
Absolutely. Yeah. I just love that you can bring Rachmaninoff and Cyndi Lauper into the same book. I would love to talk to you all day, Zoe, and I'm sure that the Better Readings community would as well, but we're running out of time. Really go and buy this book. It's such a beautiful read. I was so moved by it. Thank you so much for joining us, Zoe.
Oh, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, Better Readings community.